evening, and whatever time it is for you. Welcome to Changes, episode 30 of a Google Hangout on Air that I call Changes, Conversations Between Authors. This is also simulcast on YouTube, and you can find us in either place while we're live or anytime later. And today's guest, I am so happy to say, is coming to us from Germany, and he is a sci-fi, high fantasy author, Brian Guthrie. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So what do you want people to know about you this afternoon, this morning, this evening?
Besides the obvious that I'm a writer?
Yes.
Well, I like cosplay. I'm a Christian. And I'm extremely wordy. So I will try not to talk too much.
All I ask my guests is that if you think you're talking a lot, stop and take a breath. Because I might want to bring in a comment from the people that are watching, or I might want to insert a question, and I don't like to interrupt, but I will if I have to.
That's a good rule of thumb.
Okay. So today we're interested in talking with you because you have a new series that you're serializing on a very interesting site called Juke Pop Serials. Do you want to talk about how you found that and why you're using that?
I first discovered serial publishing online from an author that I met at DragonCon in a workshop that he did.
DragonCon?
Yes, DragonCon. It's a big fantasy, science fiction, everything convention that's held on Labor Day weekend in Atlanta.
Okay, in Georgia, USA. Okay.
Yes. So after attending one of his workshops and finishing Rise, I decided I wanted to look into serial publishing online, and I stumbled across JukePop in a Google search. That's how I found them.
When you found it, why did you decide to use it?
One, they accepted my story very quickly. That usually helps.
Yes.
And I wanted to, something a writers struggle with is finding people that will read your story and give you feedback. I mean, you could ask your wife, you could ask your husband, but eventually they get tired of reading it. So I wanted to find readers that were on a site specifically to read and help you improve your craft.
And did you get help? Did you get some good ideas and feedback from people?
Yes, actually, from my alpha readers and from the JukePop beta readers, they gave me some amazing feedback. One part of which we will discuss later, you mentioned her in your notes.
Oh, okay. Well, you want to talk about your female protagonist that you've named Logwyn.
Yes, that's
L-O-G-W-Y-N.
Yes, L-O-G-W-Y-N. She was not a part of she was a part of the story initially, but she was merely a vehicle. So I ended up changing the story to make her a much larger character because the fans liked her.
Oh, now Logwyn sounds Celtic to me. Is that deliberate?
Yes, but it wasn't because I was trying to say that she's of Celtic origin. I like Celtic names.
Does it have a meaning in the Celtic or Gaelic language?
I don't know. I never actually looked it up. It sounded Celtic, and so I went with that.
Okay. And so for people who haven't read any of your serials or haven't gone to your website and don't know anything about your series called Future Worlds, what do you want us to know at this point?
It's a dystopian future story. It's mostly science fiction, but it does have some fantasy elements. And the log line that you give the stranger in the elevator is that 4 strangers must unite to solve the mysteries of their shattered world before the forces that nearly destroyed it finish the job.
Ooh, sounds really scary. Is it scary?
I wouldn't say scary. As the series goes on, there are moments that are tense, but it's not a horror story.
Suspenseful.
Yes, very suspenseful.
Okay, so here's what I want to talk about, because I've read some of your serialization segments on JukePop, which I think turn out to be chapters, if that's what you intended, right?
Initially, yes, there were many more chapters. When I edited it, I took a lot of the smaller chapters and put them together.
Okay, so now you have these chapters, and the ones I read anyway, I read several of them, each of them ends on this kind of a cliffhanger. A very suspenseful moment. And the first one was such a great one because it's like, what's in the box? Right? Everybody wants to know.
That is
Or
the
what?
single most common question I got when I get to the end. All my alpha readers sent me a list of questions. They wanted to make sure that I had conveyed the right points to them. And the first question on every list is, what's in the box?
You don't answer it in the first novella?
No, not in the first novel.
Do you see this? I'm a nonviolent person, but I am now throttling you because I
Yes,
don't like that.
I've been threatened by many nonviolent people.
Well, it's a great way to have people keep reading, and you have a series and you're like, okay, I'm not going to give it all away. You got to keep reading. So the way you've organized this is you have the first, I guess you would call it volume, which is called Rise, and it
Yes,
includes 3 novellas.
correct.
And I have this written down because I'm going to read it because you let me know. It's Tears is the first one.
Hmm.
Paths, Paths, is the second. And Promises is the third. And those are all included or contained by Rise.
And that's Act 1, 2, and 3 of Rise.
And Rise doesn't have anything else. Like there's no prologue or epilogue or anything. That's really it. 3 novellas, right?
That's it.
And then the next one is called Fall. Very cute. Rise, Fall. And it includes Traps, so far named, and 2 others not named yet that will also be novellas, right?
Correct.
And then you have Shatter as the third volume and Unite as the fourth volume. And each of those will have 3 novellas also not yet named.
Correct.
Okay, so you're working on this over the course of, I don't know, 4 decades? Like, what is your ETA for the 3 novellas of Rise? Are they all finished?
Rise is done. It's been to the editor. Like the entirety has been to the editor. I just finished going over the second part one more time, and the editor is giving it a look over, and then it's ready to get put into published forms. And then I'll finish Promise, last one. I'll look at that one right after I finish that. So Rise is pretty much written, and I'm a third of the way through Fall already.
Okay, and so at some point, even though you are selling these as separate novellas, you're intending to have like a box set of each volume, and then maybe eventually a box set of all 12 of the novellas in future worlds?
Yes, I would.
Is that a theory that you might?
Eventually, I would like to publish the 4 volumes as 4 novels. So instead of 12 little novellas, you get 4 novels, and then put together as one series, kind of like an omnibus.
And how are you doing the art? Who's doing the cover work for you?
That was done by a friend of mine in Georgia, an artist named Chris Meckelfresh. I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. I never call him by his last name. Yeah.
So I don't
He's
suppose you
linked
could spell
MCELFRESH.
that. Okay, so if anybody wants to find him, Chris with a C.
Yes,
Chris
CH.
McElfresh. Okay. And he is designing basically the look of your Future World series in each individual cover?
Yes, the theme that you see between Rise and Fall, the black cover, the simple single word title, and then an image in the middle, that was his idea. He wanted it to be eye-popping. He's like, someone who's, when they're scrolling through Amazon, you want this to stand out to them when they see it.
Good advice. Very good advice. Okay, so I'm interested in how and why anybody would want to write dystopias, because I find them really depressing. And that's why I write utopias for my Spanner series. So tell me, why are you writing a dystopian series called Future Worlds, which makes it all sound very dismal?
The reason why I describe it as a dystopia is because the world in the state that you find it, because you've started reading Rise, I just plop you into the story. The world has been the way it has been for centuries. The world was made that way by someone's failed attempt to create what they wanted to be a utopia. And as a result, they created this world that is worse off and just barely being held together by the technology that was once used to nearly destroy it.
Well, you bring up a good point. It seems to be a human endeavor to try to make things better, and a human experience that often fails and makes everything not only not better, but way worse.
Yes, I mean, look at Yellowstone National Park.
Yes, I was just thinking about dams. So we both kind of went in the same direction of what have we tried to do that makes things better that ends up making things worse. What in particular about Yellowstone do you want to point to?
Wolves.
Oh, the wolves.
We hunted them out and then realized that they were kind of important to balance, and so we brought them back and took them out again and then put them back. been human meddling that's made Yellowstone. I mean, Yellowstone is not what it was when we found it.
Right. And they've had a lot of fires because of that, right? Because the way the growth isn't right.
Yes. Well, and forest fires are a natural thing, but we try to stop them.
Well, one of the things I was interested in is your use of dragons. And many writers have used dragons. And before we went online live today, you and I had a little back and forth because I was holding my head in shock that you are not yet a reader of Anne McCaffrey, and that you've only read one book by Melody Ron. And those are two of my go-to writers about dragons, especially dragons that have human qualities, ability to communicate with humans, special powers, all that kind of stuff. So who would you say have been your inspirations then for your dragoning?
Have you ever heard of Tracy Hickman?
Yes.
And Margaret Weiss, although I think it's pronounced Weiss. Their series, The Deathgate Cycle, is probably my favorite series. It would be tied with a couple others if it's not the top series. And in that series, the dragons play a balancing role with a serpent form of dragon. They are the good and the evil, the yin and the yang. And in that series, they have human characteristics as they talk. So a lot of my, I don't want to say I copied them, but my introduction to human type dragons was that series.
Now, are your dragons also going to turn out to be telepathic, or do they always speak?
They speak, but how they speak is sort of a spoiler.
Oh, okay. So you don't want to explain. Because I asked you about that before we went online too, is what is the biology of dragons vocalizing? You're not going to explain that because you want people to read about it?
What I will say is this. When I read my stories, after I write it, the first thing I do is I go back and I read it and I look for the stupid. I look for the things that are assumptions or things that aren't explained or things that just don't make sense. And I immediately try to find a way to fix that. And the dragons talking was one that was identified by me and my alphas early on. And so I crafted a solution, but it doesn't get explained until the second book.
Okay. Well, you mean the second novella or the second volume?
The second volume, Fall. We learn a lot about the dragons and their culture and their role in the world in Fall and Shatter.
Okay. So is your series like mine not linear in time? Do you go back and forth in terms of what you're describing and what scenes you're presenting? Like they don't always just go what we would call forward in time?
Yeah, because the format of the story is an interview. You obviously are going to get part of the story that goes to a certain point before you get the other part of the story. Initially, I was going to tell the entire story from one character's point of view, but my alpha readers didn't like that. They wanted to know backstory on some of the other characters, so then I decided to include one of the other characters' backstory and you'll discover that when you get to the second part of Rise. And the idea there was I wanted to be able to tell events that happened out of order, but have it make sense. So when you think of it as an interview, you'll think, okay, well, she got all of this story to this point, but then she needed to go and get all of the story from the other point of view. And then when she put them together for the form that you're reading it, she put them in order as best she could chronologically.
Well, one of the things I want to do right now is show people some things from your website, including your eye-popping theme cover from your friend in Georgia. I'll get to those photos later. This is the one that goes with Rise, and it really is very striking. It looks sort of like an eyeball, I guess, but it also looks like a planet with swirls around it. So you kind of get both metaphors, right?
Yeah, what that is an artistic representation of their world. I basically went to my artist and said, okay, you know what the world looks like. Now pretend you're an artist and you want to make a form of it that will, to someone who knows what it is, when they look at it, they'll say, oh, well, that's our world. And in the center,
okay.
you'll see the core of the world, which you learn about what it is later in the story.
The core of the world ends up playing a big part.
Yes, a very major part. And then the swirls that you see going around it, those are indicative of the shells that are orbiting the core. And then the big circle that goes all the way around it, that is the water shield protecting them from space.
And it has grass? I'm looking over here.
Now, the idea was this is etched in metal, so it's not an exact representation. It's an artistic view of it.
Interesting. Okay, well, speaking of not exact representations and cosplay and other things, here you are with your lightsabers.
Yep, that's my wife and I at DragonCon 2014. We went as Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade from what's now the Legacy universe, and
Ah,
we thought it would be a particularly good fan moment to have the two characters that are later married in the Legacy universe in their cosplay form kissing.
oh, very sweet. And then we have the three of you, you two and your daughter walking around. Is that in Germany?
And that's in Frankfurt. We were doing a street outreach where we all dressed in blue and moved when there was music and stopped when there wasn't.
Now, why do they have stop signs in English?
Well, because Frankfurt, the business language of the city, is English.
Uh-oh. Do we lose you or do you still have you?
I'm still here.
Oh, good. Sometimes that on and off screen sharing screws things up. Thank you, Google, for not kicking my guest or me out.
Yes, thank you, Google.
Yes. All right. So at this point, one of the things I always like to ask people has to do with what you were doing before you started writing and sort of like before and after. So how young were you when you first knew you wanted to write fiction? What kind did you start with? And how did you get to this series?
I was actually 13 when I started writing, and I used writing two ways. One, to escape from the world, and two, ironically, to relate to people that I knew by writing them into stories.
Mm-hmm.
So the world that I created back then, I actually still have some of the original writing. I was responding to trauma when I wrote, so the world there is much harsher and traumatic. Uh, but the idea that I could create a world that I was completely in control of to a person who felt like they didn't have any control was very appealing, and so that's initially why I started writing. And I've always been a voracious reader, so the idea of creating your own world that someone else could read about was all very appealing.
Okay. All right. So like a lot of people, you came to writing partly from a creative urge and partly
Hmm.
from life circumstances that seemed to inspire you to utilize it. But
Yes,
then I'm assuming at that point you were writing something that was more like realistic fiction.
and it was still fantasy.
Oh, it
It,
was.
yeah, it was, but then it was just pure fantasy. For a long time, I thought that I was just going to write fantasy, but then as this particular series started coming into the form it is now, which was about 15 years ago, so this has been a long time in the making, I started wanting to include technology in the story, and when I got to the point that I am now, it's pretty much straight up science fiction with fantasy elements, and I'm finding I like science fiction more in terms of writing it than I like to read fantasy. I don't like to write it as much.
Have you read any of the Alona Andrews series, Magic Breaks, Magic This, Magic That?
I've not read it,
Have
but I've heard of it.
You've heard about it? It's actually two people. It's a husband-wife writing team. That's not really any one person named Alona Andrews. But their theory in their world building is that magic and technology are at odds with each other and that only one can be superior or in effect at a time. And in this particular version of Earth, in the dystopian future, they are randomly taking turns being prominent. And whenever
Hmm.
magic is prominent, all the technology stops working. And whenever technology is prominent, you can use it, but you don't know when it's going to stop. And the magic is not completely stopped, but it's very much less powerful or accessible. And so one of the things that happens, of course, is they can't rely on anything that needs technology because it could suddenly quit,
Yeah.
which means no more airplanes and no more long distances in cars. And, they go back to using a lot of animals. And then there are lots of shapeshifters and other fantasy elements of the paranormal included. So there's, again, another cross-genre series, not exactly like yours, but the idea that magic and technology are conjunct in some way is interesting to me. And how did you decide to do that? And how do you pair them up in your series?
Well, the magic system is based on a language. Obviously, I'm a linguist, so language is kind of important to me. I like to break languages down and understand how they work. So when I created this magic system, magic is often created on a language system. Sometimes they explain it, sometimes they don't. But I wanted it to be realistic enough that a scientist could read it and suspend their disbelief. So what I did was I connected the language to the elements of creation, the elements of existence, the elemental table. So
you mean the periodic table?
Yeah, the periodic table. I knew as soon as I said it that was wrong.
Okay.
So at some point in the future of this world, the citizens, the residents of it, they discovered that there is a language that can access the elements, all of the elements that make up something, and that they can manipulate it. And that's where the magic comes from. They're tapping into what makes reality reality, and they're altering it slightly. They're using they can basically change the code of it to make a door appear or disappear or stuff like that.
Fascinating.
And then as they discovered this ability, they realized not everybody was good at it. And so they developed a computer language that mimicked the same language, which allowed them to create technology that could do the same thing. And so some people preferred this technology because they weren't as good at magic, and then other people preferred being able to use the ancient powers, as it's referred to in the story. And that ended up causing some problems, which ended up leading to the world kind of being destroyed almost. And that's explained in the story.
So basically you're talking about two different kinds of conjuring in the old magic terminology, where we would now use a 3D printer as a way to conjure, right?
Yeah, you can look at it that way. If you actually read the Death Gate cycle, their magic system is based on possibility. They use runes and dancing and singing to create theirs. Mine it's also based on symbology, but you form sentence columns and you connect them together to form a construct. So it's kind of sort of like that, yeah.
So power words and power sentences and power paragraphs and all of these combinations that can generate something into existence?
They can, but there's a limiting factor. You have to actually be able to convince your mind that what you just changed is real. If you can't convince your mind, it's not going to happen, and then it gets harder when you start trying to convince someone else's mind that you just created a door in the wall.
So now we're getting into the realm of Buddhism and Hinduism, the Maya, the illusion aspect of things. But we're also, from my recognition of some other authors, we're looking at Ursula K. Le Guin's with the power words in the Wizard of Earthsea series. And we're also looking, did you ever read the series of Diane Duane, So You Want to Be a Wizard? And these kids become wizards?
I think so, yes. It sounds familiar.
There's about 12 books in it now, and she's still writing them. But one of the things that it's also science fiction meeting magic in her series. And one of the things she talks about is if you don't believe it, it can't happen. So
exactly.
Even though there is this ability to be magic and you can be a wizard and you can do things, you have to have that fundamental faith in your own ability or in your own spell as you write it. And every single part that in that series, if you even make one little mistake, it's like a computer code, then the whole thing will go kaflooey and do something completely different, or it won't work at all if you're lucky. That would be the best outcome, is that it just won't do anything. But usually it does something bad because it's got a mistake in it, right?
Yeah, and when you read the second novella of Rise, you actually see the character that point of view the story's telling about, him discovering the ability, he makes mistakes, and some of them end up being bad.
Now see, in my series, in the Spanish series, I decided to go a much more traditional direction, I think you would say, where I'm looking at the extra sensory perception, ESP kind of abilities that many people attribute to humans in current as well as fictional life, and expanding on those. And I call them the excellent skills that in the Many Worlds Collective, many beings have, not just humans, lots of other beings on many other orbs and planets, and also beings in this world that we live in, other animals have those abilities. And how can they be trained? How can they be enhanced? Who has the natural and what you might call the original skills much more accessibly? Let's train them first, and then let's see what everybody can be trained. So that eventually it's almost like in, have you ever read Zena Henderson's The People? A whole series of stories and books that she has. She has these human people who come from other worlds to our world, and they blend in, except that they have all these what they call persuasions and talents. And so they can do things. And then some people can learn to do almost all of them, but they have an inherently personal skill or talent.
One of the things that I wanted, because a lot of times when you read fantasy in particular, the story there's a hero, and he already has the ability, but he doesn't know it.
Oh, okay.
Or there's a group of people that have the ability, but everybody else doesn't. And one of the things I wanted to do in my story was anybody can do it. Doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you are in life. You can do this. You can learn this, and you can become this. You can improve yourself, or in some cases people see it as making yourself worse. But the point is, anybody can do it. And the idea we were discussing earlier, the whole idea that you have to believe what it is that you're doing. I mean, that is a common theme in fantasy, but also in religion. Not just Buddhism, but also in Christianity. The verse, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can tell to that mountain, move, and it will move. Well, that requires faith. That's the whole point of the verse. You got to have faith to believe it, or it's not going to happen. So when I created this system, I wanted it to be accessible to everyone in a believable fashion, so that I could have different people at different levels and have it make sense.
Awesome. So in that way, it's very egalitarian. And so that brings me back to the feminist aspect of having a very strong female protagonist, and how you as a man are pulling that off. Do you have consultants? Do you have role models or people you're imitating? Do you base your characters on real people? How is that working?
The two main female characters in the story, Michaela and Logwyn. Michaela is my attempt to put my wife in writing. She's a fascinating creature to me, and she's obviously a point of study for me. And I can't paint, I can't sculpt, but I can write. And so when I write Michaela, I am doing my best to take what I know of her, this amazing person that she is, and put her onto paper so that everybody can experience all of her, not just the perfect parts, not just how beautiful she is, but also how diverse she is, how smart she is, how she has fears and weaknesses, and how she has to try to struggle through things. And so that's how Michaela, that character, I base her on my wife. So obviously if I get something wrong, she's going to tell me.
And does she have veto power? Yes,
very much so. Actually, when she and one of my other alpha readers were reading through it, they gave me a great piece of feedback. They said, your character isn't thinking enough. I don't feel like if you put her into a situation, I wouldn't just react, I would also think, and I would feel, and I don't think, and I don't see that in the characters. So when I went back and did my first major re-edit, I put a lot of that in there, the scenes where she's thinking to herself about her thoughts and feelings are internal.
Excellent. And then when she read through that, she felt like those were authentically possible for someone like her in those situations. That's what they would be thinking or feeling.
Yes. And in some cases, I actually mirror events in her life. The Quentin character that in the second novella, you discover more of his past. I model things based on my life, because they tell you write what you know, but I'm trying not to be autobiographical. So I take elements and I use them, and obviously I mix them up so they're not all in the same order. I use them creatively.
I do the same thing. I've picked people out of my life, including me, my family members, my friends. Everybody in my books is based on somebody real or a composite of somebody real. And then I take actual events and circumstances and augment them or change them or rearrange them or put them into a context that's very different. Like now we're with aliens and the many worlds collective possibility. But I lend a lot of my biography to Clara, my main character. She's my alter ego. I think every author has at least one, and some people say all of the characters belong to our ego. You know, the way psychosynthesis or psychodrama, they're all us, or dreams, they're all us, you know?
The entire story, if you think about it, is you on paper communicating to the reader. So it's very important that you are authentic, and you use stuff that actually will make sense in the story. You don't just want to put something in there because, oh, it happened to you. You need it to make sense in the story.
So you feel like your story is a communication between you and the reader?
Very much so. The Logwyn character, originally, she was meant to just be a vehicle to get the story from the main characters to the reader. Originally, I was writing it like a hero quest, and then I decided I didn't want to write it from the hero's point of view. I wanted to write it from what some people would consider the sidekick, and then I wanted to flip it on its head, and at some point, partway through the story, all of a sudden reveal, hey, you know what? You're not just a sidekick. You're also a hero, or in this case, a heroine. And then, but Logwyn, she was just a tool. She was simply a vehicle. But then when my alpha readers got it, particularly the female ones, they were like, well, I'm sitting here reading your story, and I keep wondering why the interviewer isn't asking these questions, because I would ask these questions. So when I went back through, I did that on purpose. I took the questions my readers asked when they would challenge something in the story. I would have her challenge it in the story to make the character explain it. And then she became this whole character who, to me, is the reader. And when you get to the end of the story, that character plays a role in what happens. So I'm trying to bring the reader along through Logwyn so they can play a part in the story. And when they get to the end, depending on the type of person they are and how they look at the sequence, that will determine, not just that won't change the ending will be the same, but how they interpret what the character does during that will be based on the reader.
Interesting. I have a character in my books that is in constant communication with my main character. Her name is Esperanza Enlaces. My character is called the Chief Liaison, the Chief Communicator for the whole planet to the many Earth Worlds Collective. And Espy becomes the Chief Media Contact. And so they work together a lot. And then the way this series comes about is that Clara decides to write it, and then Espy is very much involved in collecting interviews and other data and videos, and sort of becomes the glue that holds it all together. And then she gets to ask the questions that people aren't asking because Claire's just sitting there writing or talking. And so she becomes that vehicle, as you say, for bringing in what readers or listeners or viewers might want to ask. But I haven't actually thought about it in those terms before, so I appreciate that point of view from you.
It was originally given to me by one of my readers, so.
Great, great. Well, one of the things I'm thinking of doing in my later novels, mine is a 10-volume series, and for my alternating volumes, I have perspectives of older adults alternating with younger adults and new adults. So the odd numbers are more the older adults, and the even numbers are more the younger people. And then as it goes through the series, I continue that. And then for volumes 8 and 9, I want to do something I'm calling crowd creating, which is I'm inviting people to that level of writing to contribute ideas or whole chapters or characters or a focus. And I would give them credit in the book and let them have some input as to how it gets finalized. So I've been putting that out very slowly because I'm only on volume 3 right now, but that's volumes 8 and 9 I'm talking about. And I'm hoping that some people will jump in, that young people will jump in for the young people's perspective volume, which is 8, and that some older adults will pop in for volume 9, but I don't really care that much how old people are. And then just have a sense of their contributions being very much right in the center of the book. And I don't know if a lot of people have done this before, but I'm really excited about it. I hope it works out.
It's a twist on the activity you used to do in school, where the teacher would give you a sentence, and then the next person would write what happens next, and they pass it on. You only get to write one sentence, and it goes around the room, and you end up with a really weird story at the end.
That's right.
It's kind of a twist on that.
And then go try and edit that.
Good luck.
Well, I think in this era of so many ways to connect through social media and video and like Jukepop, Serial, Wattpad, all these serious ways for writers to help each other, give each other feedback, readers to interact with writers, and people to contribute, it's an ideal time to try something like this out. And you can go, using Google Drive or Dropbox or other things, you can actually share documents in real time and write and edit back and forth. So I'm excited about that. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but I'm crossing my fingers. It's still a couple years away from actually happening, but we'll see. And then the other thing I'm doing that I wanted to bring up is a crowdfunding campaign on Patreon. Patreon, Patreon, is a site that is devoted to helping artists, writers, musicians, all kinds of artists and creative people realize our dreams, achieve some goals, finish some projects, and we can put up whatever we want to explain it. We can give rewards to the people who decide to donate whatever amount. We can decide, if you donate X, I'll give you Y. If you donate Q, I'll give you P, and on like that. And I actually made a video of me singing about my situation very badly. And I also wrote some things
give yourself
about
some
it.
credit.
No, it's not anything I'm like lying about. It's completely mediocre, but it's fun. And then people can look at that, and in the middle of it, I sneezed, and I thought, you know what? I'm leaving that in. It's real life.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Spontaneous.
So it's patreon.com/Sally Ember, and you can find lots of other worthwhile people to support on that site. You can give as little as $1 a month, or in my case, $4. I'll give you a free ebook. But I also offer editing services, proofreading services, and other things. So I think it's a really unique time in that way, that people can have a chance to get involved with each other's creativity and support it by buying what we're creating, like in your case, buying your books, but also looking at other possibilities of contributing, beta reading, alpha reading. So you were telling me earlier that you had a very young beta reader. How did that happen?
One of my alpha readers, he was a coworker of mine. He and I would actually spend hours at work while we were getting stuff done. He would ask me a question, and as soon as while I'm working, as soon as I saw it, I'd answer it, and it would go back and forth. I've got like 190 word document pages of those conversations I saved, and he ended up reading and giving me feedback. And at some point, he just decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to let my son read it. So the son started reading it, and just absolutely loved it. The first bit of feedback I got from my coworker was, it absolutely tickles my son pink that he is the youngest reader reading it.
What an honor. And has he read everything you've written at this point, or just the first novella?
He's read all of Rise.
Wow.
So and
That's a lot.
and that father is working on getting a review from him to post on Amazon.
What a great idea. That is so awesome. He should have his own little webpage at some point. He could be the youngest reviewer. There are plenty of people who would love him to review their books, I promise you. He could have a whole profession before he's even 12.
Yes, it's just another example, like you were saying, of how the technology brings us together to do things that before we couldn't have been able to do, like Patreon. I support podcasts and a stream so that other people can hear things. And I mean, JukePop itself created their own crowdfunding platform with a unique twist on it to help get authors a crowdfunding platform that would then help them get their book out to distributors. So I mean, it's just the technology is just amazing in what it does for us.
It is, and those are the goals that I have. I'm trying to turn these video casts into podcasts, which requires a hosting site. I'm trying to turn my ebooks into print books, which requires an upfront investment, and I'm also trying to get the covers for my next books, which I have to pay my cover artist. And because of the accident I had last year, I've just depleted every penny I had, and I'm not able to work full-time yet again, and so I'm really low on funds. So I'm hoping I'll get some help. A lot of people have been very generous in helping me, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I think that the opportunity to see what's out there and support it any way we can is available to many more people than it ever used to be, and that's awesome. And there are lots of young people doing reviews. One of them, Haley Gurtin, Guertin, is doing a whole series of video book reviews, and she's amazing. I didn't even know she was a teenager when I first saw it, and I was just watching. She reviewed my book and some other books, and so I was watching, and she's going to review volume 2 for me too. But she is just amazing. She's still in high school. I don't know where she finds the time, but you should go to her site, her YouTube site or her website. She's got incredible reviews. She's very insightful and articulate, and she reads fast. And she really has good things to say. So there's a whole crew out there that are just rising.
How do you spell her last name again?
Haley, Guertin, Hailey. She's on Facebook, and she's also on Google+, and she has a YouTube channel of her book reviews. So I recommend people go to it and check it out, because it's very interesting. And she really has an interesting perspective. Not just because she's young, but because of her own vast amount of reading. I wish I could have done that in high school. I was a voracious reader too, like you said you were. And I would have loved to have had a platform for giving my opinions to people. You know? Listen to me, Robert Heinlein. I don't like the way you treat women in your novels, you know. And he was still alive then. He might have listened.
Yeah, had I had the ability, I would have given Robert Jordan and Terry Goodkind and George R. R. Martin a bit of my mind.
Yeah, it would be really fun to have a website devoted to what we wish we could have said to our favorite authors or to the authors we were reading that weren't our favorites when we were growing up. It would be really fun. I should maybe just
Such
do
a
a series
love-hate
of these.
relationship with those authors.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I like George R. R. Martin can write the most amazing dialogue, and he can create some of those fascinating characters. But my word, when he's not writing dialogue, oh my goodness, I cannot stand him.
Interesting. So his descriptions or his backstory, they just bore you?
Well, he himself said, and it's on his wiki page, that when they were discussing the more adult scenes, that for him the sensory experience is more important than plot development. And my thought when I read that was, yeah, that's not just those scenes; it's most of the story.
Well, he has lots of other people writing the TV show, so I guess they fixed all that, huh?
Well, yeah. So if you call making it more suitable for HBO fixing it,
Well, I haven't watched any of it, so I don't know. But you just made your head go off camera, so whatever you just did, you should. Yeah, that's better. Thank you. You were
just have to
using your
adjust it.
forehead there. Yeah. Well, the same thing happened with True Blood. I don't know. Did you ever read any of Charlaine Harris's original books in the True Blood series?
No,
Sookie
but I have
Stackhouse.
a friend. I have a friend that was really into True Blood, and she did not like the way the TV series treated it.
It really diverged very early on. They combined characters, they changed characters, they definitely changed the plot. And it was really a series of TV episodes that were based on her characters and her world and her series, but it diverged. She gave them all permission. She had the authority to say yes or no, and she just said, sure, take it, I don't care. I mean, she got lots of money for it, but also maybe she just liked seeing what people did with it. It's kind of like fan fiction in that way. You're taking the author's ideas and characters and you're running off with them.
Sometimes that can pay off.
Yeah, or it can just be interesting. Like you were saying, the Legacy series for Star Wars, that's not from the originators. The George Lucas people didn't write that, right? It's other people doing that.
In some cases, better authors.
I'm sure in many cases, George Lucas would be the first to admit that he's not in his strongest suit a writer.
No, he wouldn't. No, he wouldn't. George Lucas is extremely arrogant.
He thinks he's a great writer, really?
He thinks he can do no wrong, and look at him. He built the what's the word I'm looking for? Trademark, something like that. He built
Brand?
the trademark. Yeah, the brand. There you go. He built the brand you cannot break.
Oh. Okay.
You just generate something Star Wars, and it will put something out Star Wars, and it will make millions.
Well, it's really true. People love it. They've really got a huge fan base and a lot of people coming into it every year. I have to say, just on that topic, a little divergence, I'm not a big fan of the big fighting, many fighting sequences and CGI people fighting and lots of chasing and explosions. I know maybe it's because I'm my age and my demographic and whatever, but I just think it's lazy writing to have hours and hours of potential film taken up with just big battles. Like, there's no plot there. You can't even see what's happening.
It's not just movies. I mean,
books do it too. I know, and I don't want to read them.
Novels are like that. Well, exposition, the novel that starts with a massive amount of exposition to expose you to the world. I get bored and turn it and put the book away right away as soon as I see that. I want to be in the world and getting to the meat of the story, not being introduced to the world. Introduce me to the world as I go.
It's very interesting that you say that, because when we do that, then readers complain that they don't know where we are and they don't know what it means and they don't know what it's about and would you please explain and why did this happen? But then if you put all that up front, they go, oh, this is so boring. I don't want to hear that. Get me to the characters.
I'm writing what I would like to read. If other people like it as well, all the better.
That's a really good way to think of it. I'm doing the same thing, and that's why I write utopian fiction, because I think our world is dystopian enough, and I want to make it better, and I want to see if I can. I want to see if I can write us into a better world. And maybe I can't, and maybe I'll be the victim of all the people like you're writing about it, and it'll make it worse. But right now, it's still better.
I like, when I write, I don't want to insult my readers' intelligence. I want them to be able to sit down, enjoy themselves, to be able to think. I don't want them to just turn their mind off, but I want their minds to be engaged in a way that's not going, and when I do something, it's not going to insult their intelligence.
Okay, well, I'm not going to take offense at that. The implication being that you think I'm insulting their intelligence. I'm not going to take it that way.
No, but I could name a few authors yeah, we'll just leave them nameless.
Yeah. Well, this is a good time to move to my famous quarter of the hour announcement, which is, you won't believe it, but it's a quarter of the hour already.
Already?
And isn't that amazing? And we're going to get to that amazing question that I ask each of my guests, and you get to give it your own spin. So, given all the local, personal, provincial or state, regional, national, global, international economic, climactic, societal, political, spiritual, artistic, and any other changes you're aware of, which of those evoke in you hopes? Which of those inspire fears? And which do you want to talk about today? Take it away, Brian Guthrie.
Well, the one I want to talk about kind of crosses a couple of these. It's, if you think about the modern climate, both religious in religious terms, political terms, but also in just geekdom, there's a lot of divisiveness where people kind of dig in. They've made up their mind about something, and their point of view is the right one, and they don't allow for room for other point of views to exist. And recently, I've seen this the strongest in the geek world. I mean, in the past year, we've had the whole Gamergate incident,
right,
where a female game reviewer was threatened because her point of view wasn't what the people who decided to threaten her, what she didn't say what they wanted her to say. That's a big example, but even little examples of where a friend mentions that they didn't realize a particular, what you think is a particularly common fact in geek lore, and you call them out on it. Like, what? You didn't know this? In some ways, that's the same thing. It's you've got this view of the world, and if someone doesn't agree exactly with it, or they don't know all the things, or even just even know part of the things, you look at them like, what? You didn't know that? That was like the most obvious thing on the planet. I'm not exactly sure how you would go about fixing it. It's kind of a little tribal thing. I mean, people keep hoping society will get to the point where we don't have these petty little differences. But I mean, look at human history. We've been petty and tribal most of our existence. In just about any of the categories you listed there, we've been petty and tribal, and we get into these little concrete ways of thinking, and then we don't realize that there are people on the other side that, they're not bad people, they just disagree with you. And you can exist with somebody that disagrees with you. You don't all have to think exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe in the existence of evil?
Yes. Obviously there are different definitions for it. I do believe that humans, by their nature, are not necessarily good. I believe that they aspire to be, but they always fall short, which is why you have, which honestly, if you think about it, which is why religion exists, because humans are trying to better themselves and move to another level. It doesn't matter which religion you're talking about, almost all of them have that in common, that we're trying to move ourselves past our petty little things that trip us up so that we can get better and go on to the next level. Like when you're playing a video game, you can't get to the next level until you figure out how to learn this new skill, and then all of a sudden you're on to the next level. So yes, I do believe it exists. I don't believe that we are trapped in it. I do believe that there is a way out. I expressed my religious belief earlier. I am a Christian, so I do believe that there is one way out of it, but I also believe that people have to be allowed to choose, and that if they choose something different, you have to let them have it. Otherwise, you're not giving them the right to choose.
Well, what if what they're choosing is inspiring them to do very, very bad things?
Well, obviously, society to exist as a society, people will come together and establish things that are for the betterment of society. And when you think about beliefs, if what you believe threatens another person's existence or removes from them the I mean, think about, like, if you think about the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's three very simple concepts, and that if you're doing something that prevents those, then I mean, people are going to look down on that. So the question you asked, what if they believe something that's detrimental? I think, again, that's going to go back and forth, but basically based on the society. Is the society going to allow it? And can the person, do you have to let the beliefs exist? I don't know. That's a complicated question. I don't think that people should be.
Beliefs are one thing. You have one hand, you have beliefs. On the other hand, you have actions.
Yes.
And so what I asked was actually what happens when their beliefs inspire them to do very bad actions against humanity, against the planet, against whatever.
Yeah. Again, well, and that's also going to be very subjective on what it is they're doing. I mean,
not so much. No, I mean, like, really unequivocally bad. Like, nobody would think it was good except them. Like, they're murdering, they're setting fire, they're bombing, they're polluting, they're doing things that most people would agree are really detrimental.
Yeah, I think that's an outlier. I mean, that's unfortunately a common outlier. But when you're talking about a system that establishes, okay, these are the acceptable things. If you can think about some common things, like people shouldn't kill. Okay, so that's kind of an established. You don't want to do that. If someone has a belief system that allows them that they claim does that, then at that point you definitely should be able to question and prevent and stop that. Obviously, there's going to be differing points of view on what you should be able to do to stop that.
Right. Exactly.
It's a complicated question, and this is why human history has been so messy. I'm not sure if you can still hear me, but you seem to have frozen. Or maybe I have frozen. We shall see. Pardon me.